Now, the first thing that you have to keep in mind is that when you're looking at gesture in terms of looking at compositional drawings, but this is all really the same now, is that if we look at the drawings there, is that when he's doing the drawing, he is concerned with how one line leads into another. So this is exactly what I do. If you look at any of my gesture drawings, you'll find that I'm always focusing on how the eye leads. So as we're going through at this point in the drawing, and it's very clear when you look at him now, that he's just talking about how one thing works into the next, and there's no real effort at any kind of detail. It's just feeling the go for the total. So as you're going through the drawings, you look at some of these secondary figures. In other words, if you go over here and look at this figure way over in the corner, there's nothing there. It's just a very, very simple line. There's a hand going out and something like that, and maybe a little bit of tone. And also, part of this process of taking and capturing the total, in other words, this is really what maybe we should be saying. We'll keep talking about gesture drawing. Well, why don't we just call it capturing the total drawing? Because that's what you're doing. So even look at the secondary lines here, in other words, coming through behind in here, all of this stuff is leading the eye coming through. It's to get the total. So when you're composing and when you're drawing a gesture, so that as you're doing the drawing, you're focusing on using the lines to take and move the eye. And that's what when you're doing is when you're composing a picture, and that's why we look at the drawings of the old masters there, and all of the preliminary drawings are compositional drawings. That's what they are. They're taking, and everything was done as working. So they were taking, as the drawings were being done, we look at them, say, as like gesture drawings, but they weren't gesture drawings. They were compositional sketches that would take and communicate the idea. They did nothing that wasn't work related. It was all work related. And so that the most free, rough sketches that you look at were taking and thinking and designing and creating, making the eye move from one thing to the other. So this is the point. So when you look at the drawings, you're looking at, and this is really the whole point, is that all of these drawings now that we're looking at were all done from imagination. They were not working with models. They weren't doing gesture drawings. They were doing compositional drawings. And that's what we're dealing with all the time. So that as you're taking and drawing, and myself, is that how I developed the way I draw was by taking and developing compositions. But I've gone back and looked at the old masters and saw how they worked. So it's all derived from having looked at these guys and gals and taking and trying to understand their compositions. But when I was drawing, I wasn't thinking of that. I wasn't thinking of how do you do a drawing. I was just drawing to try to understand the composition. I was going for the total. Well, that has become my particular approach to taking and doing gesture drawing. So that when you're taking and constantly taking and leading the eye from one thing to the next, you naturally get a feeling for a movement. You get it, you're focusing on a total, because I'm constantly, people say, well, your drawings are moving so. Well, of course they are. I'm making the eye move. So as you go through these drawings, then you can see how we just go over this a little bit here. But you can look at these lines. You can see the flow. He's building it up. There's rhythm. There's movement. The lines he's taking and going through. Everything is building up, even into the backgrounds, the sky. Everything is orchestrated to take and create a sense of movement within the eye. It's a building, it's creating a dramatic effect that is all the lines are summing up to create that movement. Okay, let's take a look at the next drawing. This Pontormo drawing now. This is a good example because this obviously this is drawn from imagination. But as you look at the drawing now, you can see he's taking, and it's a very strange drawing, and it's actually quite small. I have a facsimile drawing print of this, and the whole drawing horizontally across is about maybe 10 or 11 inches. So what you're seeing on your screen is probably close to actual size. Now, as you look at the figures in the back here, let's start in the back. Up in the upper right-hand corner, for instance, you can see, look at this, what he's doing here. These are just very, very simple, almost a crude kind of construction. Here we get, it's almost like a happy face, or actually it's a frown on there. But you can see the way the lines are building up. So as we're drawing these figures then, the lines, he's constantly weaving. He's got really huge figures. He's got those things that are way out of scale coming through. But it's trying to feel flows. And you can see the lines underside. Look at these lines here. You can feel how the lines are going. You can see how he's moving. He's changed arms, moving around. You can see some graphite type lines that we're taking and showing the flow of the figure. So it's a process here is in taking and looking at one of these drawings. What you're doing is you're looking at the thinking process. You're actually visualizing every time you go over the drawing, in other words, when you start to go through, you can see what he was thinking. As you're doing the drawing, you're experiencing exactly what he was thinking. In other words, if you go through and just talk to yourself and say, oh, this head is turned and looking that way, and you're in the area. Now you can see look at this strange large arm that's coming through. Pontormo was credited with one of the first artists to do what we would call psychological drawing. Here I look at this figure coming down here, and the way that leg turns into the hip of the other figure. But you start to feel these lines, and it's trying to figure out, now, what was this guy imagining when he was doing this? What is he doing? You look at it, but now as I look at this, I can feel the lines going through. This figure is turned completely around now, and we've got the figures going up, but that's going right along now with this movement that's taking and going, the way the head's going up. So as you're doing the drawing, then you're experiencing, as you're going back and looking at these things, you're experiencing the actual creative elements that were involved in the creation of that thing. But as students in drawing, it's important now we look at it and say, yeah, he's got these strange twisting figures going on through here. But that's not the point. The point is that to look at the process of how he actually did the drawing, what were the stages, how did he approach it, And the key to this then is that he was focusing on what we would refer to as the aesthetics. I mean, maybe that's jumping a little too philosophically here, but aesthetics is the art experience. And so that when you're doing a gesture, you are taking, and is what Pontormo was doing in this drawing, he was creating an experience. So a simple gesture drawing then is taking and creating the experience that you are experiencing when you're looking at a figure. Your gesture drawing is recreating, or I should say, is creating an experience that tells you and lets your audience feel the actions of that figure. And it's much more than trying to do a photographic. It's not a question of, is this a good drawing or is that a bad drawing? It's, does it communicate the action? Now, this drawing by Nicolas Poussin, again, it's the whole, look at the way it's done. Now, Poussin was noted for being an incredibly meticulous organizer. Everything was absolutely in perspective. The drawing was right down to the nitty-gritty. He was a classicist, and he was considered the epitome of taking and being of a thorough artist, working out everything. But look at this is where drawing starts. Now, this would be look very comfortable in a series of animation preliminary sketches. I myself have done them. You could take and they could be passed as rough animation drawings or story-based sketches. So when you're looking at these drawings, see, you can get the feeling by looking down the ones down here. You can see where you're just going over the surface, pulling down, pull. What? There's nothing there. There's no anatomy. It's action, and this is the key point now. When I say there's no anatomy, there's only the action. Okay, when you're drawing the action, not the anatomy. You may use anatomy, as I'm doing gesture drawings, demonstrating. I will be calling out anatomy points as I'm doing it. But those are, in working for oneself and developing one's ideas, those are things that you're just using them. You're not talking about them. You're talking about what is the feeling of the overall total that you're after. So as you look at the drawing here, looking at the head in this main figure that he's got here, well, he's just going through. He's just taking and going through. You can feel there's an eye, maybe that's a mouth, a chin, and he's coming underneath, and we get sort of something for a head back here. But you can feel the shoulder is lifted up. We come across, he's using a line here. Probably it could even just be a shirt thing. But as he's drawing this, he's going over the surface and coming down, and we build. So as the drawing is built, he's coming through. He's not worried about the fact that this arm is proportionally really off. It's got something in its hand. I don't know what that's supposed to be, but you can get a sense of the drapery, the way the arm is coming across. So this is a hard part for many students to get over the preoccupation with trying at this stage of a drawing to take and be preoccupied with details. It takes a strong sense of understanding what the function of a gesture drawing is, or a compositional sketch, because all of these paintings that we look at in the Renaissance were all started from imagination. And so what we do today, the gesture drawing has taken on a life of its own as a classroom exercise. But in reality, it's taking and giving you the opportunity to be able to go outside of the classroom to capture and to look at real things, to take and make real drawing notes of people doing real things. And in fact, that was Da Vinci's suggestion, that the artist go out to the marketplace with a blank book, in other words, a sketchbook, and to capture real people doing real things, to see how people related to each other in real situations, rather than just a studio setup. So this is the gesture drawing, the ability to take and capture action, is a tool to go outside and be able to take and actually record what we see in a shorthand manner. But you have to have the facility to take and focus on the action and to actually analyze the action. Now, when you're drawing from imagination, we're taking and you're not analyzing on something, you're taking and drawing from your own imagination. And so what you have to be able to do then, as you're drawing from imagination, is to take and be able to, and this is what you do when you're going outside, by analyzing actions of the figure, being able to learn how you can take and communicate an action. And that's a big part of the whole process of being able to analyze, to look, to understand, why do you see something the way it is? What makes us see in action? Why do we, now when looking at this, just a little bit of my scribbling here, why do we look at that and say, yes, that's going up and it's going back in? Why do we see that? Well, it becomes pretty easy, actually, very obvious. What I'm doing is I'm doing lines that are going over the surface, going back in. That's just simple overlapping volumes. And you see that as going in. That's a simple tool that we use. So you have to be able to incorporate these tools and literally drawing with tools. And one of the elements that we've been taking and dealing with is that the lines, what the idea is being led. It's a continuity of lines that leads your eye. It can be rhythm, or it can just be a repetition of lines that makes you move. But that's a tool that we take, but you have to actually be conscious of making the eye move in a direction one way or the other. Okay, let's look at another drawing. Look at the drawing here. Okay, you look at it and you can see that the head is turned to the left. The right arm is coming back towards us. We can feel there's a certain sense of space to it. Now, why do we see it? Why do you feel that action doing that? Well, if you start to analyze that pose now, and it's really very simple. Chances are now, this is often even in a loose drawing like this, there's a very good chance this was drawn with a graphite underneath first. You can see in the corners lots of graphite lines there. You can feel these lines coming through. They could have been done first with graphite or charcoal. So, but when we look at the head, what we're getting is, for instance, we have the ear. You got the ear here, got the ear here. You can see from one side to the other. Also, the taking and creating this dot in the top of the head. That's creating symmetry. so we can feel the turn coming back. You can feel the stretching on the one side, and we can see the pinching on the other side. Okay, now we say, okay, but he's twisted. Well, again, how do you know that? Why do we see that? So as we come through now, if I take and just, let's look at what's happening here. Okay, here's the shoulder here. This is the shoulder here. Well, we could very quickly, you can recognize the fact that we're seeing the side of the figure here. And again, it's a symmetry. This is like drawing the box. And he's actually come down and he's drawn the center of the box here. So you were coming through. This arm is coming at us because he's wrapped lines going around it to show that it's coming back. He gives us the center of the buttocks here. And he gives us a sense of corner. So he's taking and showing all of these lines. And he gives a sense of movement to it by the flowing, like as if the drapery was being blown in the wind. It gives a sense of movement. Okay, as that leg goes in, notice what he's doing. He's drawing lines going over that surface. He's using anatomy here to take and give us a sense of a corner. But this whole leg is dropped in shadow. Then he's coming back and he's casting a shadow over this to take and show that we're coming back. Looking at the old masters and drawing from them and copying them is really an act of analysis. You're analyzing how things are being created, and actually you go by just asking yourself the question. First, you have to analyze, okay, what is the action of that figure? Okay, now in the process of doing that, you are then taking and coming up with, in a sense, solutions. Because what you're doing is now, as I look at that and say, well, okay, that leg's going in. Notice up here I'm drawing a box. And that box, I could take and be drawing this leg going back in this way. Now this is the side of this whole form. Well, look at what he's done. That's precisely what he's done. He's come through with the tone here. He's giving his thing. He's come across with this. He dropped that in tone. He's got this thing going about. That's what he did. See, so as we take a look and say, well, we look at that leg and we get a real clear sense of how that leg is going back in. We can see that this is fitting in, one form is fitting into another. But how did he do that? Well, very simply, he's showing with the wash taking and coming through, and he's giving us a clear sense of the three-dimensional form. So he's taking and communicating, but as we're studying, it's up to us to take and analyze, okay, how did he get to that point? Well, if you look on the side here, look at the lines, look at all these lines on the side. Look at that. That's where the drawing begins. It starts out with just a simple lines trying to indicate an action. That's the beginning of it. Okay, in this Tintoretto. Now, it's probably a fragment. Now, first of all, Tintoretto was a very, very good teacher. He had lots of students. But if you look at the figure, and again, we get a strong sense of the volumes and the way he's taking a move. But look at the way the lines are put down. He's feeling, coming around. That's like a school of fish coming through, and then coming in and coming out. Look, we got this line going down. Okay, but if we understand what's going on. As you can take the top now, we could look at this almost like a box or a cylinder at the top of the head. And I'll just draw it as a box. but it might be a little easier to understand. But you can see what he's doing. The light on the top, on the box. Okay, now you got a neck underneath that, and it's casting a shadow over. The neck is casting a shadow over the top of this form that is going down in space. Now that's a very basic tool. Okay, but we get the arm going up, we come over. It's the process, but there's no effort at all to take and get involved with the rendering. He's taking a very, very free flow of how the forms going from one side to the other. In fact, in my own training, that's the teachers explained to me the whole idea of going down one side of the figure to the other by talking about Tintoretto, feeling one movement going into the next. And you will see that I use as I'm doing gesture, I'm always talking about following the natural flow of the figure. Okay, well, you can look at this, and we'll see this later as you look at the Michelangelos. That's what you see he was doing. It's the natural flow of how you make the eye move. It's the movement. It's all about movement, taking and going through the figure. This is sort of fun because you can see where he did many variations on this. He was looking for the whole composition here. And in fact, he's got several different compositions going here. One, we're taking, you can see where he's fighting the lion. And then this looks like maybe an atlas or something. Oh, there's some kind of character. Oh, look at that. These are fun to just look at. Okay, this guy's got some guy's arm or something in his mouth. Okay, and he's got holding him up here. Okay, but again, you can see the lines by not lions, but lines. And you can see how the eye, he uses the things going through. Again, I'm using myself as an example for a lot of this stuff, but you can see the way he's doing this. It's Rubens' drawings with the pen that took and gave me the courage to not worry about putting lines down, because once you start putting all these lines down and then you start to take and clarify them by creating form, all of the secondary lines start to disappear. So in other words, the drawing may start out as a series of really scattered lines and going through the drawing. But then as the minute you come in and you start to take and clarify the form, going over something, then those extraneous lines start to become nothing more than a texture in the background of the drawing. And so you don't worry about lines where you've changed the placement of a leg, throw out an extra arm. Once you take and come in and clarify it as form, those secondary lines will no longer exist. They just become a texture in the drawing. And so this is the process that the artist goes through. He's taking and developing the composition, but he has total freedom to take and change and adjust and to move things around. Okay, let's take a look at another drawing. Now, in this Correggio drawing, we have a whole range now of steps in the drawing. We look at the things down in the corner. You can see this is very free. Look, I'm just drawing over here. You can see very free, very loose. things going on, very sketchy, building up. And from that, then, you can see where he's gone from these very, very, very sketchy drawings into taking and then carrying it a little bit farther and starting, because you can, as we look at this up here, you can see the drawing up in the top there. It starts out as a very, very free type of thing. You can see the lines going over the surface, coming in. We can feel the construction. The baby, I'm just going to create sort of a thing that's going on here. You can see, in other words, I'm doing this, you can see the idea is going over, pushing back. And the head's turned in here, the other arm is going up, coming through. Okay, once we get at that point, then we come back in and we start to refine it. So now in the refining here, I'm taking, okay, I'll go through, drawing a little bit darker. I'm taking, and notice that as I'm doing this, I'm taking and relying on very, very simple volumes. One of the things that I'm always talking about is the squishing and the stretching. But you can see, always coming here, how I'm in here now, for instance, I'm changing the angle of the pelvis. Coming through, you can feel the rendering. You're using a lot of very subtle tones coming up. But this is built on top of those very, very free drawings underneath, simple spherical forms. Okay. Now notice how the lines that I first put down, they're disappearing. You can't really, it gets difficult to even see them. And it's coming through, picking up, so you're slowly clarifying the composition and the way the lines go. But if you start out doing that, you are going to be stuck. So now, as I've been going back through this drawing, you can see those preliminary rough parts of the drawing are disappearing. But if I had tried to start out and taking and spending a lot of time on working on details, I would be, frankly, would be very reluctant to take and start changing things. Because you invest so much time and you do not allow yourself then the opportunity to take and make adjustments and to make corrections and to make changes that you need to deal with, so that the overall gesture in the drawing then can be very simple. You're just feeling the flow going over the surface, talking about which way it's going, and come down, okay, doing that through. Could be very free. There's no concern for detail. It's not taking and doing an illustrator's job where you take and going to use a pose, you set a pose up, and then you're just going to take and use that pose. So you're copying it. So it's not just a rough drawing. It's a working drawing where you're trying to sense the organization of how one figure takes and works with the next figure. And so you're constantly trying to feel the compose. So the question then is the aesthetics. What kind of experience are you trying to create so that you take and build forms? You're constructing. Say, as I'm doing the drawing, I'm just taking and trying to feel how he's doing. I look at this figure up here. It also reminds me of the Michelangelo's Sibyl, the pose. It's coming through, coming in. It's a different figure, but this pretty much the same pose. Through, head turned. Then we have the baby in here. Added the baby. So it's you're focusing on an action, a gesture, and not the details. Once you can get the overall gesture of something, then you can take and focus on the details, and that's exactly what they did. Okay, now in this drawing, this is interesting now, because what you have is this is actually a fairly well-developed drawing. What you have is you can see where he's been working, starting out, he was doing it with the graphite, and he's working with charcoal. Now, as you come through here, look at you've got the whole range, you got a whole range of different levels of completion or development. Okay, look at this figures right here. Look at this figure right here. Down in the right corner, that's a head. Look at the arm coming across through here. And I'm not quite sure if that's a figure that turns into an animal or what it is. But we find that you have, so going from something like that or to some of these really secondary figures or just simple shapes in tone going on back there to where we get a fairly well-developed figures lifting up. But even there, you can see, look at here, I'm just going to draw over this, but first take a look at these lines. You can see the lines that he was using to take and carry the eye through. You can see how all of the forms are building up. That's basically, and there's a rhythm that's coming through here. So as he was working this thing, and he has no detail in that head. You can see where he had it down here, then he's got it leaning back. He's trying to discover it. So we're taking in constantly, but it's this is not the final drawing. This is still a rough idea. It's the composition. He's feeling the flow. That's the gesture. That's again, it's the gesture drawing is not a gesture. I hate to, because we're using that term so much, that if we could take and change the term and call it a rough compositional sketch of an action. But that's so long, and so we just call it gesture. But it is. It's a rough compositional sketch of an action. Now, here again, look at the drawing. Look at the way the movements. So you can see how he's making the eye move, how he's working these figures, one figure flowing into the next, and lifting up, the figures are going up. Well, you notice the way I'm doing the drawing, that again, it's the same thing. It's a rough compositional sketch. Interesting in here, notice, this is something we don't always think of in terms of a Michelangelo, is that's really, look at the box form that he's drawn there. The head is a box form. The leg, these are box forms. He's coming through, and he's basically drawing a box form coming through. Okay, we usually think of Cambiaso with the box forms, but we see in Michelangelo, we see the same thing. It's a tool for clarifying how forms are in space. So often as we're drawing even gestures, sometimes it's useful to draw the figures as box forms to understand what the form itself is doing. And of course, Michelangelo was a sculptor, so he was very preoccupied with the actual mass of the figures. So you can see where he's coming through here, you can see that he's coming in and blocking in the sides of the figures. He's very clearly got the top of the figure. He's drawing that arm as a cylinder going back in, wrapping over and around the form. That's what we take, and don't just copy the fancy pen rendering. Try to see what the fancy pen work is trying to communicate. Look at the way he's taking and pushing things, going up. again and again, going over the form. Now, look at this. I'm drawing this, the figure's being lifted up. Look at the flow. Look at the rhythm that's created. And it's coming through and pulling down. See, it's the movement. Also at the same time, very simple areas of design to thinking. Simple areas against complex areas. You're always trying to develop readability. And we're taking the drawing has to be readable. Okay, readable, basically we're talking about communication here. You notice this long straight line that's coming through. That's giving us the sense of the lift. You can feel the pull through. He's creating these movements through a very strong geometric type of structure. So we're getting the feeling of the movement is being woven through. In other words, we're taking a straight and we're making the eye work with that straight. The straight makes us see the actual movement better. So these are all simple compositional devices, but these are all part of the tools of taking and doing just a simple gesture drawing. I advise students the best way to take and improve your drawing, and this goes for gesture drawing, is to take and draw from imagination and to create pictures. To take and create something and working out a composition, you will be then using your drawing skills. And it'll become very apparent of how you take and draw of what is needed. And if you can then take and use the way you draw to take and compose a picture as the beginning point for taking and doing gesture drawing. That is a point in the process, rather than just thinking of this is a 2-minute pose or a 1-minute pose, and that this becomes a classroom exercise. The classroom exercise is not the point. The point is to take and communicate an action and how you take and communicate these actions, and to take and also at the same time you're learning to analyze an action. Parmigianino was an incredible artist. He was contemporary Michelangelo's. He was actually at some point was almost more famous because he was one of the first guys to take and really start dealing with prints. Okay, now what we have, and this is the part that sometimes is a little difficult to communicate. If you look at this drawing, now I'm just taking and drawing, thinking of the head here, of the main figure on the left. Okay, now he's taking and he's turning the arm. The arm is going in, and you can see the way as that arm is going in, you can see the series of overlapping shapes that are taking as we go through and going in. Okay, body's going through, the other arm is taking and going back in, going back up. Keep going through, coming across. Okay, now see the way I'm drawing this? You can feel the body turning. And even though he's wearing a skin, he's come in and drawn the sacrum back here, and he's got so we can see that the leg, we can see the legs going in. But that's not even the point that I want to make. As he's doing this and he's looking back, is that look at the next figure. This figure here is taking and doing this. Okay? The next figure is reacting to that. Look at the lines. Look at all of the tones now. This figure here is taking and going back and pulling away. In this way, the lines are going this way. And so there's a flow of movement from one thing to the other. Now, this is something that you have to become sensitive to because it is beyond the technical aspects of taking and doing a drawing. It's the feeling of how the eye moves so we can see these lines. So now as I'm doing the drawing and talking about it, I'm making that thing happen at the same time. So you can feel this going here. We can feel this is now turning and going back with the head turning and going back the opposite direction. As this goes this way, the head is taking and turning back out this way. So these are compositional consideration, but the feeling, how one thing feels and flows to the next. That's again, that's the action. It's composition, but it's all part of the analysis of the figure, analysis of the old masters, and it's also a critical element in being able to communicate a gesture. Put this Francisco Mola in here. Now, if you're not familiar with him, he's actually an interesting artist to look at. His paintings were quite realistic, but mainly to show that how crude a drawing can be and still have value. Because we got this teeny head here, and it looks like we've got this angel pouncing on or putty pouncing on the reclining nude, and then we got the devil coming out from behind the sheet that's hanging there. But the idea is just this is the inspiration of an idea. You put it down. Don't censor. And that's what you do when you're drawing and you're working. When you're working in a film, for instance, you start out with the very crude, rough drawings, a story sketch. It can be it's just the idea. And again, you might call this a gesture drawing, but it's the idea of an action, and it's the idea of a composition. Composition is a group of actions. It's a group of lines and tones and shapes that create and communicate something. And so that's what you're doing, is you're organizing lines, shapes, and tones to communicate and create an experience.